Honor to be here with you. My name is Ellen Zwarnstein. I get to be your facilitator. I am the executive director at the Michigan Center for Civic Education, where we oversee many programs, including We the People. Your judges are here and they will introduce themselves. They will ask you to introduce yourselves, and then we will begin with the hearing itself. Wish you the very best.
All right, good morning. My name is Barry Anderson. I'm an associate justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. I'm a senior justice on the court, which really all that means is I've managed to hang around for a very long time. I have a long and successful association with this program, but if you go far enough back, I was an assistant coach many years ago, and so I have some understanding of all the work that you've done, all the stress you're under, and you're waiting eagerly, but with some worry about the obnoxious questions your panel is going to ask you. I get it, but we're going to have a great time. It's going to be a great conversation.
Sure. I'm Hank Chambers, a law professor at University of Richmond. Been at this for a long time, probably, gosh, a couple decades, quarter of a century now. So I've seen a lot of these, and I'm sure we're going to have fun this morning. It's very good to see your teacher again. I haven't seen her in a long time, too long. But like I say, we're going to have fun this morning. So good to see y'all.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Zinkin. I'm a career law clerk at the New Hampshire Supreme Court. Been here for about 21 years. Prior to that, I litigated in San Francisco. I've been judging at the state level for somewhere between 5 and 10 years, and this is my first time judging nationals. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
You'd be so kind as to introduce your team and your coaches, teachers.
Hello, I'm Jack Albert.
Hi, I'm Griffin Whalen.
Good morning, I'm Sadly Mamadi. We're all seniors from Raleigh Charter High School, and this is Ms. Klein, our teacher. It's nice to meet you.
Very good, very good. Well, we're here to have a conversation about Unit 4, and the question, no surprise, is question 2. I'm going to read the question, and then you may just begin when I'm finished, and we're going to listen to your statement, and then we're going to have a conversation. So, members of Congress are not only legislators, but they are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of the public officers. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? Explain the differences, if any, between the power of Congress to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? How effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers? We're looking forward to the conversation. You may begin.
The oversight and investigatory powers of Congress aren't explicitly stated in the Constitution, but instead are implied by Article 1, Section 1, and the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8. The Supreme Court case McGrain v. Daugherty formally established Congress's power of investigation as a power with legislative purpose. At its core, investigations aid in legislative duties by giving Congress the ability to research before enacting legislation. On the other hand, Congress uses oversight to ensure that the executive branch is fulfilling their duties.
The investigatory power has been especially effective in addressing scandals and public problems. Investigations regarding money trusts, U.S. embassies, and current pandemic-related issues exhibit the varying role of the investigatory power. The 1912 money trust investigations proved to be extremely effective as they uncovered market manipulation from bankers. This enabled the Senate subcommittee to garner support to pass the 16th Amendment and the Clayton Antitrust Act.
Conversely, the 2012 Benghazi investigation was one of the longest and costliest congressional investigations in history. House members used the Benghazi investigation to vilify the opposing party rather than addressing the attack on U.S. government facilities in Libya. Despite conducting 10 separate investigations into the attacks, Congress found little evidence to confirm allegations of misconduct and cover-up.
More recently, the power to investigate has aided in writing pandemic-related legislation. In part, these legislations have been effective. House subcommittee members have worked to process vaccine injury claims and problems with recipients of CARES Act funds. On the other hand, much of the House's oversight regarding COVID-19 has focused on President Trump's management of the pandemic, instead of focusing on vaccine distribution, stimulus checks, and other more pressing matters. Overall, we believe that this power has helped Congress craft legislation by diving deeper into public problems, but investigations are difficult to conduct and they have been misguided by partisanship.
When done properly, oversight can be an effective way to identify problems in our government. Because of congressional oversight during Nixon's presidency, campaign finance laws were toughened to ensure that an abuse of power like Watergate wouldn't occur again.
In the past few decades, the power of oversight has proven to be more and more ineffective. An unappealing process, oversight requires Congress to get involved in the fine details of laws, and they often lack the expertise to do this. Furthermore, oversight is usually out of public view, and therefore members lack the media incentive to use this check on the executive branch. Partisanship has also weakened oversight. Members may not want to penalize someone within their party for fear of breaking ranks and losing re-election.
Notably, in the last administration, President Trump and other executive officials tried to enact a subpoena stone law. When officials do this, they deny Congress the authority to bring forth executive officials for oversight and evade a vital constitutional check.
The power of investigation is imperative to keep our legislative body informed to craft laws that meet the public's needs. The power of oversight is necessary to ensure that these laws are being enforced by the executive in a way that aligns with the intentions of Congress. While one power is in the legislative purpose of Congress, the other is fundamental within the system of checks and balances, making both powers equally important in our Republican government. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Let's begin with a discussion about the partisanship issue that you raised. You cited some examples of excessive partisanship. To what extent, can we get control or improve the partisanship atmosphere relative to congressional investigations? Probably also affects us on the oversight side as well. But in terms of reducing that partisanship, how do we go about doing that?
I think one thing we could do is reduce term limits. Congress members really have careerism, which is where they're focused on getting reelected, and this kind of is an endless cycle where they're not really focused on their specific duties, but getting reelected by the people. So if we limit term limits, maybe do 2 or 3 term limits in the House or 2 term limits in the Senate, I think that Congress members would be more accountable for their actions and would not always be focused on reelection.
Also, congressional staffers are actually responsible for a lot of the investigation that goes on within oversight. So in the Senate, there are bipartisan staffers, and in the House, staffers are hired by the party, and this leads to their investigations often, their findings are more partisan because they're searching for information that will please the representatives that they're working for. So maybe making the House like the Senate and have bipartisan staff members.
Would term limits make staff members even more important and more powerful?
Yes, definitely. I think that this is one of the problems that we could see with imposing term limits, is that staffers would be there throughout multiple Congress members and would end up taking more power. So it could actually end up being where the staffers are more important than the actual Congress members themselves, which is dangerous.
Okay, that was going to be the next question. Is that a problem?
I think it can be viewed as a problem when you think of it one way, but another way, it also allows staffers to have a great deal of experience over a lot of different representatives and maybe be able to formulate better ideas that help us more.
Just to add on to Jack's point, I think the staffers would function like the bureaucracy, where members kind of hold positions for decades and decades and have a lot of expertise in one specific area and can really rule on that expertise.
So isn't that really what the executive is supposed to do? Why would you want to put that in the Congress as opposed to putting that into the executive branch?
I think specifically if we're talking about investigations and oversight, a lot of times it involves the executive. So having someone in the executive responsible for that, I think, is kind of counterproductive in a way where it's just one branch checking itself, which we know is not how checks and balances works. So I think having someone in Congress doing that, possibly even an independent commission that lies in the executive that is separate from it, would even be a better option. I think that's bipartisan and doesn't even have to suffer through partisanship.
Okay.
I'm wondering, oh, wait a second, am I muted? No, I'm not. I'm wondering how we measure the effectiveness of investigation? Is it based on how much money is spent? Is it based on whether the investigation turned up actual wrongdoing? Is it based on whether or not the investigation led to some reforms? What do you think measures the effectiveness?
I think one thing that really measures the effectiveness is the witnesses' willingness to comply to subpoenas, which we have seen in the last administration with President Trump's subpoena Stonewall, and even in past investigations where either witnesses leave the country or plead the Fifth Amendment in order to refuse to come into Congress. I think that is one thing that shows ineffectiveness in investigation. When Congress is unable to bring in witnesses and subpoena them and can't use their contempt power, I think that really shows ineffectiveness. And if they are able to bring in all of their witnesses, I think that really is a measure of effectiveness in investigation.
I also think if Congress was to uncover some sort of problem and they were to pass legislation to address that problem, that's the ideal situation. But another ideal situation is where Congress doesn't actually discover any problems in our government, which is much less likely.
I would argue that Congress has ceded to the executive and judicial branches some of its powers, which means that the investigative and oversight functions are perhaps even more important. But assuming for the moment that I'm right about that, how do we go about recovering those powers? What should Congress do to bolster the Article 1 structure?
So specifically talking about the subpoena Stonewall, to address that, both houses of Congress have a sergeant at arms. So in the Senate, that's Karen Gibson, and in the House, that's Timothy Blodgett. Their sergeant at arms can be used to enforce a subpoena. And so even in a case where it's a president who's refusing to testify to Congress, using the sergeant at arms to hold a president in contempt could be a beautiful representation of how Congress has a constitutional power to do that.
I think on that note, this administration is a perfect time to do that because the Democrats control the House, Senate, and the presidency. So using the sergeant of arms is not just a partisan debate. It's not just to attack someone of the opposing party, but it's to uphold the Constitution and its fundamental rights. And I think if Congress used their sergeant of arms in this administration, it would set a precedent and a good example for future administrations.
So the sergeant at arms can bring people to Congress, but can't necessarily make them testify. How do you get them? How do you get that piece resolved to actually get folks testifying?
Yeah, so some of the sergeant of arms, if they want to go as extreme as bringing them to the Capitol Police, that is technically allowed. They could bring them to the Capitol Police and kind of drag them in. Again, they can't force them to say anything, but I think making a public spectacle of it will attract media attention. And like a lot of us know, President Trump refused to subpoena in his first impeachment. I think bringing media attention to it will increase pressure from the public, will increase pressure from other Congress members, from his own executive branch. And I think that would definitely help that person testify. But again, nothing can force a person to testify, unfortunately.
But will it also have an effect on partisanship?
Definitely.
Can you clarify your question?
Yeah, will it also have an effect on partisanship, dragging folks into Congress and trying to make them testify?
Definitely, which is why I think that this administration is a perfect example to do that, because since the Democrats control all three parties, it just shows that it's not a partisanship debate, but it's about the Constitution. It's about upholding checks and balances and separation of powers.
Okay, do you suspect that there'll be stonewalling with this administration if Democrats control all branches?
It depends on if President Biden would have something that he would not want to share. I don't expect it, but I hope it doesn't happen.
Okay, because what I'm running into is that what I'm asking is this about partisanship or about something else? Right? Because if Democrats control each branch, then it's probably not about partisanship. Is it about something else?
Well, maybe you're looking for that it's a constitutional right that Congress has to subpoena. It's not written within the Constitution, but it's implied within their legislative powers and the necessary, yeah.
Gotcha.
Should we be concerned about our time's up? All right. Sorry.
You
Very
can go ahead
good.
and ask your question. We'd love to hear it.
No, it wasn't that great anyway. So we thoroughly enjoyed our conversation this morning. An extensive conversation about what do we do about recapturing partisanship, or bipartisanship. And I think you're onto something here when you talk about the staff situation. There are some very specific, very granular kinds of changes that could be made in terms of how many staff are hired. There's a pretty good argument that Congress is believe it or not, that Congress is underfunded relative to the executive branch and staffing. Maybe a requirement that staff are hired with the joint consent. People, when parties are in majority, they don't want to give up this authority, but one way to foster bipartisanship might be to have staff jointly hired by the chair of the committee and the lead. You're onto something here that I think is really pretty significant. I enjoyed our conversation about this. I would just say that on that question I asked about what powers has Congress ceded to the executive and judicial branches, I think there are things that Congress needs to be thinking about doing in the exercise of its Article 1 powers in terms of the way it passes legislation. Do we grant to the executive all this discretion in the first place, or do we attempt to rein in that discretion? And that's a really complicated question that we could spend much time discussing, and that wouldn't be productive for either you or me. So we'll just leave it there. It was a great conversation. I very much enjoyed it. Colleagues?
Yeah, I think that's right. You laid out structurally speaking how or where the oversight power comes from, where the investigative power comes from. So I thought that was good stuff. Your examples were good as well. Just in general, on the term limits question, we didn't take as much time on it as we could have. That's something where you may well find that other judges may decide to spend more time with that if you all have a chance to do this again. On the subpoena thing, I think y'all have thought about it. Of course, you talk about the subpoena stonewall. What I do want you to do is think a little bit more about how subpoenas really work, right? The way they really tend to work is there's negotiation ahead of time between the executive and Congress. And in a situation where everything is controlled by one party, generally speaking, you're not going to have to issue subpoenas. Folks are going to show up. And if they don't want to show up, then the subpoena won't be issued at all, and they'll find another way around it. So I hear what y'all are saying. I'm not sure that it's that people will respond to it terribly well in terms of on the ground, but I do like the fact that y'all at least have thought your way through those particular issues. So y'all have done a fantastic amount of work and have thought through these issues in a way that some other groups have not. And for that, I appreciate the conversation. So good stuff.
I echo what my colleagues have said. I thought that your opening statement was well written. I thought that you did a good job of sort of weaving some information about sort of the historical basis for the investigative and oversight function with some current examples. I enjoyed the conversation a lot, and I hope you did too, and I wish you lots of luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.